This is the story of a debate that America will never forget. A night when politics crossed the line into something darker. When a young candidate hurled words so cruel they echoed like a wound across the nation. On one side sat Karoline Leavitt, hungry for power, armed with sharp ambition. On the other, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a humble servant of God, known around the world for his faith, compassion, and defense of human dignity. What happened that night on live television was not just a clash of ideas. It became a moment of truth about what it really means to be American, and what it means to live one's faith under attack. The tension in the CNN studio was unbearable, like a storm about to break. Anderson Cooper turned to Leavitt for her response. She leaned forward, eyes locked on the Cardinal, and delivered a sentence that stunned the entire country. "Maybe it's time you stop pretending to understand America and go back to the Philippines where you belong." The gasp from the audience was immediate. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others simply froze. It was the kind of insult people expect in the shadows of the internet. Not from a political figure on national television. But Cardinal Tagle did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He adjusted his microphone, his calm presence filling the stage. "Miss Leavitt," he said softly, "what you just declared does not speak of me. It speaks of what America chooses to be in moments like this, under the eyes of the whole world." His words hung in the air, steady, deliberate, powerful. The cameras zoomed closer. Leavitt shifted uncomfortably. The Cardinal leaned forward, his gaze unshaken. "If going back defines who belongs in this country, then half of America would need to leave, including your own family, if we are honest about your history." The room went silent. Anderson Cooper looked stunned. Viewers at home felt something shift. A priest in red robes had just dismantled a political insult, not with rage, but with truth. Before we continue with what happened next, I want to invite you. Tell me, from where are you watching this video? Your city, your state, your country. And may God bless you wherever you are, in the name of Christ who unites us all. To understand the weight of that moment, you need to know who these two people are and why the clash mattered so much. Karoline Leavitt, only 27, had risen faster than almost anyone in her generation. From a small town in New Hampshire, she had carved her way into politics as one of Donald Trump's youngest and most aggressive defenders. Her sharp tongue and relentless style made her famous in conservative circles. To her supporters, she was bold, fearless, a fighter. To her critics, she was reckless, willing to say anything if it kept her in the headlines. Across from her was someone completely different. Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle was no career politician. Born in Manila, the Philippines, he had spent decades in service to the church, visiting the poor, comforting the sick, and preaching the gospel with humility. He was respected worldwide, not because he shouted, but because he listened. Where Leavitt built her career on division, Tagle built his mission on compassion. Where she sought applause, he sought souls. CNN had billed this debate as a battle of ideas: national security, immigration, America's place in the world. But the truth is, the producers knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted sparks. They wanted the clash of a brash politician with a man of the cloth. What they never imagined was that Karoline's ambition would push her to cross a line that even in today's politics felt unthinkable. Questioning whether a cardinal, invited as a moral voice, truly belonged in America. Tagle had faced storms before, earthquakes in his country, poverty, even persecution of the faithful. He had buried children lost to hunger, stood beside mothers who had nothing but faith left to cling to. Compared to that, the insult of a politician was almost small. But Tagle knew this was bigger than him. It wasn't just about defending his dignity. It was about defending every immigrant family who had sacrificed to build a life in America. Every believer who carried both a Bible and a dream into this nation. Leavitt thought she had scored a point. But what Tagle said next would not only turn the debate upside down, it would begin a conversation about America's soul that no one could ignore. The debate had started in predictable territory. Anderson Cooper opened with questions on border security and immigration policy. For the first 20 minutes, Karoline Leavitt delivered her lines with the confidence of someone rehearsed to perfection. "We need leaders who put America first, who understand our values instinctively, not by reading them in books." Her voice cut through the studio, polished and prepared. Cardinal Tagle responded with calm precision. He spoke of laws, but also of people. "I have seen the faces of families torn apart by violence, by hunger, by fear," he said. "Borders are important, yes, but more important is how we treat the human being at that border. Because how we treat the least among us is how we show our values." His words were not fiery. but they carried the weight of the gospel. The tension built when Cooper pressed them on the Trump administration's immigration record. Leavitt grew sharper. We need officials whose loyalty cannot be questioned. Real Americans, not people who spend their lives proving they belong. The phrase "real Americans" sent a murmur through the audience. Everyone felt the barb aimed directly at the cardinal. Tagle's jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes never lost their gentleness. "Miss Leavitt," he replied, "I hope you're not suggesting that American citizenship is determined by bloodline rather than by service and values." Leavitt leaned forward, her tone cutting. "Some people understand America by birth. Others will always be outsiders trying to prove they fit in." It was the kind of line designed to sting, rehearsed for a viral clip. The studio grew silent. Anderson Cooper shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. The producers whispered frantically in the control room, wondering if they should cut to commercial, but Cardinal Tagle remained still, as though he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "Miss Leavitt," he said firmly, "be very careful with the road you are walking, because the measure you use to judge others will one day be used to judge you." It wasn't anger. It was scripture, and it pierced the silence like a bell. The air in the CNN studio felt electric, as if everyone knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. Karoline Leavitt leaned back in her chair, satisfied with the sting she had delivered. But Cardinal Tagle did something unexpected. Instead of looking wounded or defensive, he smiled, calmly, serenely, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Since you want to talk about who truly belongs in America," he began, his voice steady but sharper now, "allow me to tell a story, not only about my family, but also about yours." The audience shifted uneasily. Even Anderson Cooper tilted forward, sensing that something historic was about to break. Caroline's face stiffened. Her confidence cracked just slightly. Tagle continued, "You told me to go back to the Philippines, as though service to this country could be measured by birthplace alone. But before we measure anyone, we must look honestly at our own roots." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he reached beneath his chair and lifted a simple folder. "I come from the church, not from politics. But I know the importance of facts. So before stepping into this debate, I checked the records that are open to all. And what I found, Miss Leavitt, is very revealing." Caroline's hands tightened on the armrest. The cameras zoomed in. "My parents," Tagle said, "arrived in America as visitors, as priests and missionaries do. We carried no wealth, no privilege, only the desire to serve God and His people. I have walked the streets of Manila with children who had no shoes. And I have walked the streets of New York where immigrants built lives brick by brick. That is my background. That is my loyalty. To people, to service, to Christ." He opened the folder and pulled out a page. "But your family's history, Miss Leavitt, tells us something important. Because according to public records, the Leavitt family came to America not as founding stock, but as immigrants themselves. In fact, they arrived from Canada in the 1890s. Your great-grandfather entered this country seeking opportunity, no different from the people you now dismiss." Gasps rippled through the studio. Caroline's confident facade faltered. She tried to interject, but her voice caught in her throat. "And here is the irony," Tagle said, raising his eyes to the audience. "The very people who sponsored and supported your family's entry into this nation were not only immigrants, they were immigrants from Asia. Without them, your story in America might never have begun." The room erupted. Some applauded, others whispered in shock. Leavitt sat frozen, her face pale. Cardinal Tagle had turned her insult upside down with nothing but truth. The applause swelled, then settled into a heavy silence. Everyone waited to see how the cardinal would finish what he had started. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he stood, his red robes catching the studio lights, his posture calm yet commanding. "Miss Leavitt," he said, eyes fixed on her but voice directed to every viewer at home. "You asked me to go back, but let us ask, what do real Americans actually do? Real Americans don't measure worth by skin or birthplace. Real Americans build, they serve, they sacrifice." The words rolled like a homily, but sharper, anchored in truth. "My parents came with nothing, but they gave everything. They worked long hours, lived modestly, and sent their son to school. I became a priest, then a bishop, and yes, a cardinal of the Catholic Church. My mission has always been to care for souls, whether in Manila, Rome, or here in the United States. If service does not make me part of this country, then what could?" He turned slightly, facing the audience now. Meanwhile, Miss Leavitt's family, immigrants themselves, arrived with the same hopes, the same hunger for opportunity. They were welcomed, as so many before them. And yet their descendant now stands on national television denying to others what her own ancestors received. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others looked stunned. Scripture tells us, Tagle continued, raising a finger gently, that the measure you use for others will be used for you. To demand that others go back while forgetting your own roots is not just hypocrisy. It is sin. It is pride, and pride blinds us to God's truth. He paused, letting the weight of the verse linger. Then his tone softened. But I do not speak this to condemn. I speak to remind America of her soul. This country is great not because it closes doors, but because it has opened them. To Italians, to Irish, to Filipinos, to all who came with a dream and the will to contribute. The audience erupted again, some clapping, some rising to their feet. Anderson Cooper looked stunned, unable to cut in. Karoline Leavitt sat speechless. Her strategy had backfired. The Cardinal had not only defended himself, he had transformed the insult into a sermon that resonated across the nation. The studio was no longer just a debate stage. It felt like a cathedral of truth. Every eye fixed on the Cardinal. He held the folder in his hands but no longer needed it. The facts had already spoken. Now it was time for something deeper. I have walked with families who left everything behind, Tagle said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. A mother carrying her baby across deserts. A father working 3 jobs so his children might one day sit in a classroom. A grandmother praying her rosary in a foreign land, asking God to give her family a future. These are not strangers to America. They are America. They are the face of sacrifice, of perseverance, of faith. He looked directly at the camera, speaking not only to Karoline but to millions of viewers at home. Real Americans do not tell others to go back. Real Americans remember where they came from. And they give thanks. They build bridges, not walls of hatred. They see Christ in the immigrant, in the refugee, in the poor man at the border. For whatever you do to the least of these, you do to him. The words cut through the silence. Older viewers across the nation, especially Catholics, felt the weight of the gospel alive in his tone. It was no longer politics. It was a moral reckoning. Karoline Leavitt tried to respond, her lips parting as if to deliver another attack, but nothing came out. She knew the cameras were on her. She knew millions were watching her unravel, while the Cardinal stood as immovable as the cross itself. Anderson Cooper finally broke the silence. Cardinal, are you saying Miss Leavitt's words represent a sin against American values? Tagle shook his head gently. I am saying her words represent a temptation we all face. The temptation to divide, to exclude, to believe we are better because of where we were born. But Christ teaches us the opposite. He reminds us that in him, there is no Jew or Greek, no slave or free, no insider or outsider. There are only children of God. The audience rose to its feet, applauding thunderously. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Leavitt lowered her gaze, her confidence gone. The Cardinal had turned her insult into a testimony of faith, and in doing so, he had won the heart of America. The debate ended, but the echoes of Cardinal Tagle's words spread faster than the studio lights could cool. Within minutes, social media was flooded with clips of the exchange. Headlines appeared across every platform. Cardinal Tagle silences Karoline Leavitt with one sentence. Go back comment backfires on national stage. Faith meets politics, and faith wins. Conservative commentators scrambled to respond. Some tried to defend Leavitt, but even her strongest allies struggled. One prominent donor publicly announced he was withdrawing support, saying, I cannot back a candidate who insults the very roots of America. Meanwhile, Catholic voices across the country were jubilant. Bishops and priests quoted Tagle's line about real Americans in Sunday homilies. Parish bulletins carried the story. For many, it was not just politics. It was evangelization on live television. Ordinary Americans, especially older viewers, felt something stir. Letters poured into dioceses and newspapers. One man from Ohio wrote, I came here from Italy with my parents in 1954. When the Cardinal spoke, it was as if he was speaking for my father, who worked in the steel mills his whole life. A woman from Texas said, my grandmother always prayed the rosary in Spanish. She would have cried hearing Tagle remind America that immigrants carry Christ with them. Even politicians across the aisle reacted. Senator Ted Cruz, the son of an immigrant, tweeted, Cardinal Tagle reminded us that loyalty to America is proven by service, not ancestry. Surprisingly, even critics of the church, usually quick to dismiss clerical voices, admitted that his dignity had set a standard few could match. Anderson Cooper, reflecting the next morning on CNN, confessed, in 30 years of moderating debates, I have never witnessed anything like this. The Cardinal didn't just win an argument. He turned a political insult into a national catechism on what it means to belong. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt faced devastation. Her campaign manager resigned. 3 donors walked away in one night. She called a press conference, insisting her comments were taken out of context. But the video was everywhere. There was no escaping the truth. America had seen her words, and America had heard the Cardinal's reply. In the days that followed, the clip of Cardinal Tagle's calm yet devastating response became one of the most shared moments in American political history. But more than a viral video, it became a reflection in parishes, homes, and hearts across the country. At Mass the following Sunday, priests quoted the Cardinal's words, "The measure you use for others will be used for you." Older parishioners nodded knowingly. It was the gospel they had heard all their lives, suddenly proclaimed on a debate stage in front of millions. For many Catholics, it felt like a divine reminder that even in the noise of politics, the voice of faith could still shine like light in the darkness. Karoline Leavitt's career unraveled. Donations dried up, endorsements were withdrawn, and staff resigned. She faded into damage control, while Cardinal Tagle's influence soared beyond the church. He was invited to speak at universities, community gatherings, even bipartisan forums. For once, America was not applauding a politician's zinger. It was applauding a man of God who had answered hatred with truth and dignity. But Tagle himself refused to gloat. In a humble interview days later, he said, "This was never about me. It was about reminding America of her soul. This nation is strongest when she remembers that every stranger, every immigrant, every child of God has dignity. We are all pilgrims, and the earth itself is not our permanent home. Heaven is." Those words touched millions, especially the elderly who had seen America change through decades of hardship and renewal. It was a reminder that faith, sacrifice, and love of neighbor remain the foundation not only of the church, but of the American experiment itself. And so the story ended not with political victory, but with something greater. A nation reminded of its roots, and believers strengthened in their faith. Wherever you are watching this, from a small town, a city, or even across the ocean, never forget this truth. In Christ, no one is an outsider. We are one family under God. May He bless you and keep you, today and always.